cycle of economic, societal, and government upheaval so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
Hey, and I do welcome you wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet as we spin and orbit our happy star that is changing its magnetic field state, causing changes on our planet. Now, a lot of people knew coming in, stepping off this solar maximum, we'd experience more earthquakes. Santorini, the super famous Instagram spot, beautiful islands with all the white homes just packed in on the cliff there, they've evacuated the island. They've had something like 7,000 4.0 earthquakes in the last 3 weeks. Now, can you imagine living there? I was staying down here in southern Taiwan, and we had probably 8 earthquakes that were 4 or 5 or 5.5 over the last same amount of time. And even that amount is disturbing, where you're just like, okay, it just never comes back to normal again. Then, but to have that many, it would definitely wreck your human psyche to have that many going off at the same time. You would definitely want to leave just out of, your body wouldn't function correctly. Your mind, the electrical connection with all that Paleozoic discharge charge hanging in the air, it would definitely affect your mental capacity. And hopefully it would put you more into like, we got to go and get out of here. People stealing eggs everywhere. Tether's building an open AI to run your Bitcoin transactions for you. What could go wrong there? There's just so much happening. It was one of those weeks where really 2 or 3 months of change has been packed into a week or 10 days. So this had happened during the COVID time, right? The overwhelm and the shock and awe of just so overwhelming in the news that what? Well, what's the stories? What's really going on behind all of that? Because that front layer is really, it's like a fuzz, a scattering wave. For everybody's psyche, there's just 100 million stories to jump on top of. They're all just like grandiose, larger than life, Hollywood-esque times 10. And then they're layering on top of themselves. But I want to peel what's behind the layers back here of really what's going on. Because this shock and awe campaign, again, in the news cycle that we've seen, remember when it happened when the October 7th of last year, and the whole news cycle was dominated with just everything Middle East, everything invasion, everything boom, just everything completely taken over for those few weeks of shock and awe of what was happening with Israel and Gaza and Jordan and Iraq and Iran and missiles flying and the Russians with their arsenic missiles, and just everything was happening. The same kind of completely layered, overwhelming shock and awe in the news. And then we're seeing it again right now. So what is being covered up is the question. That's the way we need to look at this tonight as we approach all these news stories here. So Ransom, I know, I'd sent you a bunch of links from Japan setting new all-time record snow totals, 4 feet in 12 hours, just, record rains over in San Francisco. We're starting to see not only the climate fallout, but the economy fallout, where gold leases, there's not enough gold on the planet anymore for everybody who wants it. So they're scrambling to deliver gold without collapsing the gold market. So we're at that point right now where society and civilization, as we understand it, is kind of at the very tailing end, being held by literally threads. And I think this is what they were trying. Did they put all this out to cover up the gold shortages? That's my question. So Ransom, floor is yours, man.
See if I can find my button. No, I've been watching like an eagle eye the moves that they've been making. And I'm convinced now I see a bigger portion of the plans for the future. I mean, it's just all fitting together nicely, kind of as predicted. We're going to have turmoil in the Western Hemisphere, but nation building. You know what's funny is that this whole group kind of that push to change politics now has been the group that's been claiming that, you know, we need to stop being entangled in foreign wars and no nation building. And then what I'm looking at is the exact opposite of that. We're setting up for massive empire building, which, starts off as nation building. And the first step of any nation building is to flatten it. Demolition. You can take that however you want. But that is the first thing that you do. You flatten the older pre-existing infrastructure, and then you bulldoze it. Then you build new stuff. There you go. That's nation building, because you charge the country or whatever area it is to rebuild it. And therefore you can put your products and services and trade network in the place of what used to be there. So what I'm saying is just it's really kind of a pathetic repeat of every single empire that's ever existed in the Mediterranean, as far as there's two groups that want key points of land, and it has nothing to do with politics or any of that kind of stuff. What it has to do with is nation building and empire building, because you have to set up the infrastructure first. And the only way that you can do that is to control every port of entry and piece of farmland that would be loading onto ships. So I'm pretty much seeing that. If I were to take over and make one of the biggest repeats of the Roman Empire, I would set my eyes on specific land tracts, namely the Nile River and the ports on that side, and then the Black Sea. I would have to have that because that's the highway into Eurasia to deliver products or receive products. And then I would make sure that I had the entire Mediterranean as set up as a trade zone where I could pick up things, maybe say in North Africa in a new grow zone, and just ship it right over the Mediterranean and be able to tax every bit of that the goods that they're going to need in Europe, because they've shut down their own production. So it's a good thing that there will be some new trade partners to the south that will be more than happy to ship stuff right there. And in order to do that, you got to make it safe for the new empire. And, well, if you've paid attention to any of these historical empires, we've had the Persians, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians. Well, they weren't really too much into the sea, but you had all of these other cultures that lived out there, the Minoans, etc. You could just go stretch back in time. But the key thing that all of these empires, from the Greek, the Roman, the Persians, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, whoever had control any time period, they had to get that little area that connects the Black Sea with the Mediterranean, and also the Nile River and the ports that are near there that go out into the Arabian Sea. So you have to have that. So every single one of those old empires had a map that you could just draw out, and logically, that's where things are going. So that would include the North African countries all along the coast, and all of the bottom countries in Europe. So from Spain all the way over to Greece, Turkey, and the whole Levant. And you wouldn't be able to do that unless you could set up a permanent port to do business out of. I'm just saying. That's what you'd have to do.
Now, I sent you some maps already just because I was on this the last couple of videos. Yeah, I sent you two maps. The frankincense route map that shows these areas were far wetter some 1,200 years ago. And then I sent you the old Roman highway map that shows you all the grain trade routes through North Africa, all the way over into what you would consider Turkey today, and those southern regions. I sent those over to you, Ransom, on your Skype there. Now, the important thing to understand is the trade routes that moved through North Africa all the way over into the eastern side of the Mediterranean, like those were all controlled by the Ghana Kingdom and the Aksum Kingdom, and kingdoms you probably haven't heard of too much through history. They don't really teach that very much because these were such vast networks running through river systems and estuaries to facilitate their trade from West Africa to East Africa through some of the driest places on the planet. Now, we've always been told that, the last 6,000 years in the mid-Holocene going forward, that North Africa and the Sahel have just been, drier, like bone dry places. And that's always the way it's been. Well, it's really not been that way. If you go back 1,800 years, the trade between, and the gold trade and the salt trade and different spices and minerals as we understand today, were all taken by barges and what you consider reed boats. I mean, that whole connection from the Nile River all the way over into where some African mega lakes that still retained water that had canal systems brought into them, and then further afield down into the full river network across Africa. And there were still mega lakes that were connected by river systems through northern Africa. Like, this is returning now, these rainfalls, and that's why a lot of these cities and towns and villages that have followed their retreating water down as it was drying are now at the bottom of these lakes. And when the floods and the rains are returning like they are now, suddenly all these areas start to fill back up, and then you get all these towns inundated, everybody's flooded out. Well, those waters aren't going to recede. That's the big thing that people aren't understanding, is that, like, if you look at the historical pattern on this, we're going to start losing a lot of crops in the northerly latitudes, like 40 north and 40 south, and down to or above to the North Pole, which is most of Canadian crop growing zones, some of the North American. So where do you substitute this from? Because China's experiencing great losses in Heilongjiang, biggest floods ever recorded there, biggest snowstorms ever recorded. Korea's getting hit by just insane amounts of storms that are far out of the ordinary. Japan just got 12 feet of snow, or 12 feet of snow in 12 hours. I sent that link to you there. It was off the Watchers, which is a great site if anybody's taking a look at that. Let me pull up the article here for you. Yeah, 4 feet of snow in 12 hours. That's the most they've ever had in a February storm ever. And that goes back to the 1600s. See, Japanese records go further back. They actually go back to about 800 AD. But what you consider official is about 1600 forward, because at that time, meticulous. So think about the Britain meticulousness, how England was very meticulous in their records. Well, Japan was just as meticulous. So were the Sumerians. I saw some old cuneiform tablets scrolling down, and they were, it was a grain entry logbook, basically, but in cuneiform text, precise. They wanted to know where every grain of wheat went to, because remember, in the past, our value of money was determined by the grains of wheat or barley. Today, it's opposite. We just use the money to buy the grain. But in times past, when it was more difficult to produce food, the amount of grains equaled the silver weight. That's the difference. So the preciseness of even a few extra pounds of grain being lost in today's equivalent would be like extra rounds of silver bullion laying and just tossed off to the side. So as we trace back through history, understanding we're back at this cycle again, and this is why there's so much forced change happening in our world, we have to look at this very same area that is being nation built now, because the rains are returning, and they were once veritable gigantic breadbaskets. Ransom, I would encourage you, can you jump back to that map again of the Roman highway system in North Africa? Those areas, that is the frankincense route. I could explain that one for a second here. So you see where it goes from Petra, from Gaza to Petra, all the way down to the Musa, and that's down where we consider Oman and Yemen area. So the Yemen port of Yemen is right there, Musa and Ocelis. These areas were incredibly wet. This is where the Marib, M-A-R-I-B, the Marib Dam was located, and it was the largest water body dam system in the Middle East at that time, in now what is the driest place in the Middle East, heading out into the empty quarter. So they used to use this water system, excuse me, to irrigate the frankincense areas that covered hundreds of square miles, at least in that one region where it's all dark gray. They had the harvesting areas, the growing areas, the producing areas, all fed by irrigation from captured rainfall through the Oman and Yemen cliff systems. That's not there anymore. And then they used to run that all up and down the Red Sea there. And those areas became so prosperous and so wealthy. And if you were off left or off to the west in North Africa, the Aksum Kingdom and Sudan and Eritrea, I like to say that, they took over the gold coinage weight and measurement system from Romans after they collapsed around 500 AD. And they had the most precise gold coinage. But what's interesting is when you look at the back of their gold coins, it was wheat on the back of the gold coins with the king. It wasn't Nezerah, escapes me for a second. The king of the time had the wheat imprinted on the back of the coins. That's how important food was, even at that time. So you start taking a look at also the Roman road system that you had there. I'll send you that map. This follows exactly where our nation building is going on. Clinton, Hillary took out Libya. Well, they had the largest water project to grow and irrigate desert to grow crops. That, I think, was taken off the shelf for a little while until it's now going to be put back on the shelf. Like these proof of concepts, look how deep down. So if you look in the center, you see where there's that one strange area that jumps completely off and really far down into what was desert area. That wasn't desert area back then either. When the Romans had it, it was more of an estuary area where they were able to farm crops. So Gaddafi knew this same area and those two subsequent areas that pulled further south. They knew that those were more wet down there. There was more soil moisture in those areas. Those were grain growing areas in the Roman Empire time. So when you come down through Libya, and you go down in there and you get over to Morocco, getting a little more, and you got Tunisia up there, Egypt as well. Like they all increased their grain production incredibly, doubling their grain production over the last couple of years. Now, if it was one country that did it because they had new technology and new irrigation systems and they put $1 billion into water pumping stations, I get it. That's fine. But every single nation across North Africa increased their grain production from natural rainfall. So the cycle's coming back. Now, if you're going to nation build, now Ransom walked me through it, what are you going to need? You're going to want shorter transportation routes to deliver your most essential good, which would be food. Because you can tap the Nubian sandstone aquifer areas too. That's just one, the Sus aquifer. There's like 100 aquifers under Africa to get your fresh water source. But you need that. You need the food first to have the civilization. And if you can control all that food from one area, you can decide who gets it and who doesn't. Then you can control a new grain growing area on the planet as areas in Canada and China and North America and Australia go offline in South Africa to bring up a new breadbasket in this same area. And, now we're seeing it in earnest. It's playing out, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, not only that, if you're a nation that's right there at the center of the ancient control of the Mediterranean. Nobody from the Asian countries, like Russia or anybody else, can come out of the Black Sea and do much because you control the outlet that allows you to go anywhere. So you can't stroll down to the Red Sea or none of that stuff, which means that you would cut off the trade for them. But like you said, you would have control of the trade there. And not only that, there would be less activity without risk of mutual assured destruction. So it's like a giant embassy that does business. Not unlike, ancient Aztec ports. And speaking of which, you would have to have the Panama Canal if you wanted to really hem up anything. If once you got those two locations, then all you need is a third location somewhere in the South China Sea or even a little east, maybe Hawaii, Japan, and Taiwan. And you have basically hunkered down 2/3 of the world that will be in your control of trade. So it depends on how you look at it. What I see is the resurgence kind of the Roman Empire map, which is going to include most of the Middle East. We're making business deals with everyone, which seems to me, if they're so friendly to make business deals, then they're all on board with the redesignation of map lines, which we predicted for the last couple of years that this would be the outcome of all of the stuff there is redraw the map. And then you can, strategically place stuff where you need it. It'll be in the future if you just think about that. With all of the shutting down and the weird socialist tendencies of European countries over the past decade and a half, we're going to get to a point where all of a sudden there's historically friendly flags showing up to sell goods to those people that don't have goods anymore, instead of them doing the same thing. But maybe they'll catch on, and then really that looks like a even stronger giant trade alliance that could be stability. Now, it could go the other way because they always have to have a little demolition, like I said, before you can have a new empire. You got to flatten the parking lot. You got to get your permits. You got to sign your contracts. And then you're open for business. And that's what's happening. The same thing is happening in the Western Hemisphere, though. New trade alliances are happening. I know a lot of people were against NAFTA, but that's essentially what we're about to have. I wouldn't even be surprised with the resurgence of a new idea that is essentially the North American corridor. And the reason for this is because we're open for business again, at least, for the time being. But a lot of stuff's happening. People said a lot, but then they changed their mind when it was time to renegotiate, which tells me that a lot of people are getting what they want behind the scenes. We're not even hearing about the stuff that we're conceding to get these deals, really. But it's starting to look like we might have the 80s over again in the U.S. But for everybody else, it's going to be a transitional period into something new. This reminds me a lot of the plans of the Trilateral Commission. I hate to mix things together, but when I hear certain things, it reminds me of other things. So basically, we're getting an East Asian trading bloc that's being set up. And that would, include the Pacific Ocean and all of the trade partners in there. And then another Mediterranean bloc, not a European bloc, but a Mediterranean bloc, because it includes North Africa. And there's a lot of people that want to do business there that we've traditionally had problems with, but everybody seems to be wanting to upgrade to a new lifestyle. Now, for some people, that would be just coming out of the 12th century into the industrial age. But for other people, they're going into an insane digitally controlled AI world. And what I mean by that is we are volunteering everything. I was watching this, it's the latest in the Star Wars franchise, and it was about a planet that minced the gold bars, and they were cut off from everybody else in the universe, and they were totally micromanaged by a supercomputer, and they had these little robots running around with cameras for heads, so there's always someone watching, and it was a happy utopia where everyone follows the rules or the robots intercede and remove you from the population. Deportation, basically. You would get deported out of the system because you weren't playing the financial and rules game. And I think we're volunteering for that. Instead of a robot with a camera on their head, we just have lots of digital devices that make a 3D mapping system of everywhere we go, shop, eat, and all of this. And it's funny that the entire nation is just tripping on the price of eggs, as that's like a pivotal point in our civilization that egg costs are up. When all kinds of I guess the rebuilding of the reality is happening everywhere else. And everybody's been caught on to the last 10 years of fads and arguments and all of that. And it's easy to see now that's all a distraction. And in the background, everything is going as planned for the future. We're just not going to get out of it. Muted. You're muted. All right. Let me see here. There you
Yeah,
are.
I got you there. So what did they buy themselves? More time. The news distractions are here today, but the agenda moves forward another day by the distraction. All this shock and awe that's here at the moment. What got moved forward on the agenda behind that, and the globalist slash technocracy moving us into central bank digital currencies? Although Trump said we won't. That's cool, but have you seen Trump today? The True Social had filed for an exchange traded fund to trade Bitcoin. Okay, that's fine. BTC by itself, not really central bank digital currency. But the whole stablecoin offerings in America that are going to have regulation around it. Tether going to be part of the new treasury to issue stablecoin dollar offerings outside without inflating, but at the same time allowing you to borrow against your crypto holdings on that whole edge. They're setting up like a dual running ecosystem. And somehow in the future, not known yet, but this is going to dovetail into the treasury, where USD Tether is going to be allowed to mint like the treasury does for the crypto side of things on the outside. Now, is that a central bank digital currency? Not really in the perceived definition of it. But all these things are marching forward. The new alliances put in, the new agreements for the rest of the world spinning forward with climate and this sort of World Health Organization. They're all still moving forward with the same, lockstep outside, even though we in the United States have stopped. The rest of the world outside continues to move forward with that agenda that was, like you say, from the Trilateral Commission or the Club of Rome or these maps from the 10 kingdoms that was my most interesting thing, is these maps from the 10 kingdoms that were released in 1972 from the Club of Rome really start to put it into a lot of perspective of all this nation building happening. You look at that map, it's the exact same map. Like the things that were all different and separated before this year are going to be consolidated into 10 regions on the planet. Now, if you look at this map called the 10 Kingdoms map from the Club of Rome, 1972, I think I sent that to you, Ransom, last week or a couple shows ago. This thing shows you already where the regions are going to be snapped together. So you take a look at that whole region from like Greater Israel all the way down through the Middle East, like that's all going to be snapped together in one region. Yeah, you see how that extends all the way through North Africa, all the way through the Middle East, all the way over, and then it stops pretty much at China once you come in through Pakistan and Afghanistan. Right up there, it looks like at around Kashmir. That whole area is going to be sandwiched into one autonomous overseen zone. And then if you look over where the black part is, that's connected with India and Myanmar and all the way down into like Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. And what do you see there? I see Taiwan. And that's the whole thing. It's like Taiwan, it's supposed to be invaded by China, it's supposed to be invaded by China. But you look at the map, no, it's not. That was all just a ploy for the weapons industry to sell more on the guise of it's about to be invaded, it's about to be invaded. Like we've been played left, right, and center. So this is truly the map we're moving to. So once you start to see that, and then you go, okay, well, all these peace agreements are coming in, they're here, they're there, they're here not, all these things are getting upset. And also you talked about the North American Union. That railroad map that extends all the way from Canada through the United States down into Mexico, and there are several railroads participating. CNS was the first one, and there's been a couple more railroads that have joined in on their routes from north to south, covering 3 different countries on the North American or the North American continent here. That whole north-south route is exactly what you just described, but it was first going to be rail routes that would open large cargo in and out. So that says something too. You're not moving like iPhones too much on a train. You're moving thousands of tons of grain on a train. You're moving thousands of tons of iron ore or other minerals on a train. That's what that's for. Bringing over cargo, super cheap to take it from China. That's how you're bringing your iPhones. You're not loading them on a break bark, like open rail car to send them over up to Canada. That's not happening. This is for bulk carrier. Tungsten, yeah, another one that's gone off the rails here. I sent you that article earlier. I was talking to Bob Kudla last week. We did an interview, and he was saying he was he'd been telling me for the last 3 months, he's like, Dave, the market's going to crash. Tech, get out. If you're in any tech, you got to move out of that. Not financial advice. Never really talked about it. Didn't know if it was going to come to fruition, but he kept saying the same thing. Tech's going to crash and we're going to move to commodities. He's like, man, we are going to commodities. You're going to watch every commodity run. And here we are. Tungsten is the first. Gold's the second. Not enough gold right now in the Bank of England's depositories because it's all locked. Here's another thing, ETFs, all right? So exchange traded funds. The underlying thing, like if you're going to start an exchange traded fund, you have to have at least some of it behind. So if I were going to have an ETF on phones, I need to have at least a certain amount of phones, like physical phones in a vault somewhere, and then I can issue some sort of contracts off of that, and then they can be listed on the stock market, and then you can buy in and sell on it because I have the underlying thing. I have the physical thing. Bitcoin ETF, they got to have a certain amount in cold storage that can be verified, easy to verify that, third party. You know where the transactions have gone, which wallet address they sit in, who claims that wallet address. That's super easy to trace that. I mean, that's like basic 101 understanding blockchain. You could do that analysis yourself within a week of understanding blockchain. If you knew nothing about it and you learned how transactions and hashes can be followed and how to use like Etherscan for Ethereum or whatever you're going to use, Tronscan, you could follow. There's an enormous amount of different ones where you can follow out the transactions in each of those different coins and then their platforms. You know, where's it moving to? Even after a week of just knowing blockchain, you could verify how many Bitcoin are in an ETF address that's listed on Wall Street. That's simple. What's not simple is knowing how much gold's in a repository. And it seems that, at least from this last week of articles, they've run out of gold to deliver. And here's where we get in the rock and the hard place here. The ETFs need that gold in the depository or in the safe, if you like to call it that, the vault, whatever it is. There has to be a certain amount of tons of gold for them to operate and have their issuance listed on the stock market. If they take that gold away, they have to pull their listing from the stock market. And ETFs are not willing to do that. They've spent an enormous amount of millions of dollars of time and review and lawyers and then finally listing it and getting the brokers to list it. And it takes, you don't go from zero to full ETF on the stock market in like a week. That takes some serious planning, a lot of oversight, and a lot of money and time involved. But they have to have a certain number of, let's say 1 ton, I'll do simple math. You have to have a ton of it. And then you can say how many ounces that would be. And then you can offer those on your exchange traded fund on a stock market offering for a gold ETF in like New York or in Chicago. Okay. But you got to have that or else you can't. That has to be your base to even offer it. If you go below that, they pull you. You're offering it. No, you can't get listed on the market anymore. All right, so we're at that point now where everybody's pulled as much gold as possible out of the Bank of England. There's not really a spare ounce anywhere laying around. It's all locked up in ETFs. So now a lot of people want delivery. Gold's getting really hard to get. So people are like, I want my gold, I want my gold. And they're like, well, it's not here. We're going to have to lease it to give it to you. So then the Bank of England goes out on the open market and says, all right, I'll give you 20% more for the gold to borrow it short term, to give it to dude like me who wants my 400 ounce bar and give it to me. And then sometime in the future, I'll pay you with interest to give you your 400 ounce gold bar back. That's called leasing out the gold. So far, they're paying absurd premiums to lease this gold to get it back in for the Bank of England, to be able to give it to the people who want it for delivery. And there's literally not enough gold on the planet. The system is truly about to collapse. If they cannot continue to get gold through the next 2 to 3 months physically delivered into, then the whole house of cards, as you understand it, collapses. Now, I think a lot of this news barrage and shock and awe is to cover up this part of this story. This is one of the pillars of the financial system on the planet. But the gold, as we understand, Ransom, can you go to, let me see, worlddebtclock.org or debtclock.org for the US one. And on the bottom, they'll show you the paper contracts to actual physical gold contracts or how much physical is out there compared to debtclock.org. And if you could throw it up on a screen, run that through for you. ORG, I'll see where that pops up. Because this is where the magic, or is it maybe it's US debt clock? There's well over 100 ounces on contract paper for each 1 ounce of physical delivery that is promised. So here we are. If you go to the bottom right side there, you'll see that on the bottom there. When I'm trying to unlock and get back to my screen here. There we go. Yeah, on the bottom where it says black and it says, okay, 1,000. How many paper ounces? Because it's kind of blurry on there. So 115, yeah, so they're taking the total debt, dividing by the amount of ounces of gold, and then they'll give you the approximate price that gold should be divided by our national debt if it were to equal and be par, which is well over $12,000 an ounce. But you're looking at the paper contracts there, and it looks like, how many paper contract do you see? 379. 379 paper options out there for physical gold compared to really 1 ounce of real gold in your hand. That system is breaking right now because people want to claim delivery on it. I don't know why suddenly everybody wants the gold, but they do. Now there's options that you can take cash delivery. Sometimes they can force you, but if you're like let's say China, they want the delivery because they're citizens, they demand the delivery. Like countries can do that. You as a company or a person, really not. But there's all that. What is it with all these countries around the world suddenly want their physical gold delivered on these option contracts? See, this is where the system's starting to break. There's really not that much extra gold out there. China's hoovered up a bunch. Almost all the BRICS nations pulled in at like hundreds of tons. And there's really not much out there left in the wild, really, unless individuals start to sell it in. And the only way they're going to do that is raising the gold price well above 3,000. Like anybody who's got gold, they're not going to let it go for 3,000. Are you kidding me? When they know it could go to 5 and like that fast, because we're out of gold. Not really out of gold. I mean, there's plenty of gold around the planet. Just the way the system works, where it's supposed to be in a central bank and then delivered out, and the Bank of England and the London Bullion Metals Exchange, and how this interoperability works. Everybody's getting rich off leasing gold right now. And at some point, we're going to come to the point where either individuals, like I'm talking really wealthy, dynastically wealthy individuals, are going to have to start giving gold into the system to maintain the system. But I don't know many of them, at least in conversations and things I read about these families of old that have really true, like trillions of dollars of wealth. They don't want to part with $1 billion worth of gold. That is family holdings, and most of that gold's probably from the 1700s, 1600s, shipwreck treasure kind. It's not in like what you consider bullion bar form. It's more been accrued over the last 700-800 years in different nuggets and trinkets and, you know, gold vases and different kind of. It's not just like, here's the gold. They would even have to refine it and melt it down, smelt it, and turn it into gold bars. So this is where we get into. And then what are you going to do? You're going to take like 5,000 of my gold doubloons and melt them down into a gold bar and give it back to me? No way. That doesn't matter. Each one of those things is like 3 times what your regular delivery would be. Like a perfect condition gold doubloon minted in Spain. And those were the coins that were kept and given to some of these families. Like, are you kidding me? Like the most perfect mint condition coin from the middle 1400s. And that is your base collection for your gold holdings. Nobody's going to give that up. Like the gold's out there, but we are coming to a serious pinch point, and perhaps this is why we're seeing so much structural change right now. Something's being covered up with this gold, and I'm just going to leave it there because I think this is truly something that if you're looking for a disruptor in a way that we need to change the system, or something that could change the system or be a catalyst to change it, this could very well be it. And Porch Monkey, best podcast on the interweb. Thank you so much. Super chat off the Buy Me a Coffee. Just wanted to read that out. Porch Monkey, best podcast on the interweb. We try our best. We're trying to interweave some ideas tonight too. Ransom?
You know, I was thinking that all the companies would, countries would most likely be hoarding anything that you could build electronics with right now. Because we're about to have an electronic AI arms race, and this isn't just the nation states. This is everybody, because you could easily order all the parts you need, and with a little know-how, you're now technologically just as advanced as some of the enforcement groups out there. So I was showing everybody this week, like I was kind of going off on it, because it's exactly what I described for years now. That everything's tightening up, and this has all got to do with money, obviously, and not in the way that people think. Like it's controlling the money, yes, but it's more controlling the people to force them to need certain things to have the money. And right now, like all along our border, you now have what amounts to a DMZ. It's demilitarized as far as there's no combat, but it's militarized as far as it's ready for combat. And, last week I was talking about all of the Army artillery, from tanks to armored trucks to troops to all of it. They were out there practicing, doing what they do. And then a few days later after our show, I saw Pete Hegseth on the local news down there in El Paso talking about that would be the center for the operations going forward. So in other words, Fort Bliss is about to get a big injection in money. And this is going to be directly related to why I said, you might not have wanted a North American Union, but you're going to get one anyway. Because Canada and Mexico has agreed to all our strategic ideas about security and the flow of products. Now, I don't know what was said, behind closed doors on telephone calls, but it looked like everybody got with the program real fast. So we have a new program, and I believe it's something like be our friend or be our enemy. And most of the nation states are lining up to be our friend, including and not limited to some of our enemies. So they're going to be frenemies, and we're going to do trade with them. We're totally redesigning the world. And I think that's, part of why they started joking around about the Gulf of America, because, it's not really Mexico or the United States. It's North America. So it's the Gulf of America. And, when we have the Panamanian Canal again, or the Panama Canal again, everybody in South America now has to renegotiate with us as well. So everybody, and the worst kind of loser in this will be China, because they've been running the show on that for a while. And now they're going to have to come up with some kind of retaliatory business plan, because that's what it is now. We're going into not the nation states so much, but the corporate states. And it's like almost every sci-fi movie that you've ever watched, where the corporate state is more powerful than any nation state. And the reason for that is because the nation states rise and fall depending on how much money these corporate states make. And unfortunately, I'm going to put it, not war, but demolition is one of those major businesses, along with the rebuilding. So we're going to do a lot more of that, a lot closer to home. And you're going to see on the news more of this stuff. So it's been verified. There is an uptick in drone warfare along the border. So this is going to have to sort itself out. But right after that, if we get to that point, that is, there will be an economic boom. So I agree with Bob in the short term. I think we're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off. All of these programs are going to have to reset everything. And you see the big, kind of scandal about the U.S. aid program, or USID as they keep calling it on the news. I don't know why. It's U.S. aid. We give billions and billions of dollars to our friends, our enemies, and our frenemies to do little programs. And all of that is getting shut down, which means that, last week we were talking 600 billion in one sector, 700 billion in another that might disappear. Imagine all the people that are losing their minds right now because their little secret programs are about to lose hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's going to be some kind of retaliation for that, which brings me to my next point. All of the intel organizations that you know about, hear about, are about to rebrand. So, like, let's take the CIA, for example. They're responsible, admittedly, for coups around the world, rigging elections. You could go back as far as you want. Now they're tied to assassinations of public figures here in the U.S. Due to declassification. So we know that. We know about their MK Ultra programs back in the day. So their name has been worn out, so to speak. So it's not that far fetched that they're all about to rebrand and go out into the public sector and get new jobs where you lose track of them. So I'm sure you heard on the news that the administration is offering CIA personnel the chance to quit and get 8 months severance pay and just go off into the private sector, which obviously, where do you think they would go? They would go into business, finance, military industrial complex. They're all going to get jobs because they're tied to and they have sway with a lot of people in different industries, and they're just going to disappear right into those industries. And then for the next decades, these are the people that are going to be deciding business models, trade agreements, where the food gets to be grown, where it doesn't get to be grown. So there's a new kind of attack, I guess, from the top down. And this time it will be a completely corporatized business model. So in other words, these will all be agents of different industries and not be held up by any accountability that we may be experimenting with right now, where we're acting like we're going to be accountable and transparent. Well, you can't be accountable and transparent in private corporations because they're private, and that's the whole idea. And once again, you're going to see the ideas of constitutionalities being used against the masses. So it works for the individual, but it also works for the corporation. Corporations are personhood and people are corporations. That's why, what you're doing is none of my business. It's why when you get married, you have a partner, you start a business. The whole thing is a maritime setup. And that's kind of what I'm talking about right now. We're going into that maritime type corporatocracy where the most important spots on the globe will be entries and exits from oceans. So all of the ports of entries of waterways to be able to move goods, that's what's getting renegotiated. That's what the new empires are going to be set up. And you're about to start seeing new maps. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be split into three. In the past, they wanted an African sector, but for one reason or another, that's not going to work out. But if you had a strategic control of certain governments or partnerships with them, you might want to be friends with South Africa. And I know that there's a lot of turmoil going on right there. But if they can line that out, that will be another place just as important as the Panama Canal or, anywhere in the Mediterranean, which leaks out into the Indian Ocean and trade from there until you get into the Pacific. Which would be that third block, the East Asian trade block. And we already have basically three powerhouses there representing kind of this new empire. So who knows what kind of goods are going to get very expensive in the short term because everyone's renegotiating their trading. So you're going to see foreign goods go up. You're going to see American-made goods go up until they figure it out. But I think this might backfire on the people that think that they're going to rake in and rob the lower class, because what it's going to do is force each nation, because of tariffs, to start building their own stuff and buying locally, because it'll end up being cheaper in the long run, which creates these new networks of trade and barter, which is the whole circle that they're trying to avoid. They're trying to get us out of that. But inevitably it's going to happen again, which means new black markets are going to open up all over the world to get goods places. You know, the famous Russians there during the Soviet era used to enjoy some of the world's best products right straight from their own black market. So the higher ups in the party would be eating the best caviar, the best wine, the best whiskey, you know, all of the great stuff. And we're going into that again. It's just going to be more friendly with the business suit. But my question is where does that meet up with the AI control? Because that seems to be the end result and the goal. So I have a feeling that they're going to be on the public giving you this new stuff like we're going to control the air traffic with AI so there's no more problems with sleepy people or tired people or distracted people or DEI or whatever the excuse is. The AI model is safer, you know, so that's going to move over into finance. And we talked about it before, deciding for you what kind of foods you eat, which I would imagine would be, you know, manipulated by those who sell products to say, hey, you know, there's this product that you need, but it so happens to cost a lot because of the tariffs and the trade, and it doesn't come from where you live anymore. But that's okay. They make it over there in another land, and we can buy it at 3 times the price for you.
Yeah, thanks for the price increase. I like how you're just milking my wealth. Think about how stealthy that was. The entire planet it could possibly be hit with an instant 25% increase. If you're throwing a tariff on that country and they're throwing a tariff back on you, then both those countries just got a 25% increase in good prices. But who's getting that extra 25%? The companies. The companies. So it's all comes back into, like you said, to trail on that thought, you know, moving into the corporations trying to shift wealth versus governments. Then this whole tariff regime going on, is it more of a mask to now take and reduce and consolidate 25% more of the world's wealth into corporate hands, which would then also be available for government hands? Because in this world, it's hard to know the difference. The graying line between government and corporation is so gray that you're in a fog to even find the splitting between the two. So milking the world's wealth on 25% on tariffs either way. I mean, how much longer will it be before all these other countries say 25%, 25? What if it goes higher? What if it goes to 100%? Then we're starting to look at, you know, things that are going to become so unaffordable. And then your foods are going to get cut down. The amount of food imports, unless you're going to want to pay 25% more, 100% more. So everywhere you look, it's nothing about, I can see the restructuring in the Treasury. I get it. And Jesse, JSE 4325528. That's not 8675309, but 4325528. Maybe we can make a song about that one. Thank you for the super chat. Follow the electricity and metals relationship. So let me throw one up for you here. Oh, is that a Canadian? Yes, it is. How much energy did it take to get this out of the ground? AI, could we move to AI mining rigs? You know, the dump trucks that are bringing stuff in. It doesn't have to be the actual dozers and that sort of thing on site, excavators. Could it be just the dump trucks go to AI also, and then the inside, the plants themselves? Because the amount of energy it took to get this ounce into my hand was just absolutely astounding when you track back how much energy this thing took. If I could equate this into an energy form of either electricity or how much actual energy this took, this will never come unlocked. That's the whole thing, is these metals never come unlocked from the amount of energy that you had to put it to get them out of the ground, refine it, smelt it, mint it, and get it to you. This energy is forever encapsulated in this metal here. It never, I mean, I guess if I left it out in nature and it returned back to its base form after 10,000 years or something, but otherwise, this is energy locked into a physical form. That's what's so interesting about the amount of resource input to get this metal out of the ground. And if we're going to go into a bimetallic system again, which I've heard floated around here, moving back to a gold-backed currency and silver also to offset some of this, bringing in along with Bitcoin, which also requires electricity. So then we get a digital form of the same thing, locked in energy usage, or we get the metals that'll. So we're starting to take a look at, we're going to need more energy to facilitate a lot of this transition here. So scraping the 25% of the world's wealth away, is that going to get us more electricity to get more stability on the financial side of things? Not sure. We'll talk about it when we come back from the break. Ransom Godwin sitting with me tonight.
How do you feed your families when the shelves are empty, the stores are shut, and there's no food available? What is the fastest, easiest, and most productive foods to grow? What is the quickest way to get somebody who has no skills at all up and running and producing very quickly? If you understand that we're at a point in history where it is no longer optional to be growing your own food, if you're like really freaked out and concerned because you've never grown food before and you don't have any skills, you don't know how to do that, but you know how important it is, then I want to let you know, however you stumbled here, you're in the right place. My name is Marjory Wildcraft. I'm the founder of the Grow Network, and I have been the female leader in the survival and preparedness space for the last 20 years.
How to grow lots of food, even if you have no experience, are older and out of shape. This is for people who want the fastest and easiest ways to produce healthy and delicious meat, eggs, and vegetables. Because you know that growing your own food is like printing your own money. During this webinar, you will get status of global food shortages, how long the crisis will last, how much space you need to grow food, easiest, highest calorie foods you can produce, a complete plan for producing all the food you need, how to get started today, regardless of season. Marjory will show you the fastest, easiest, and simplest ways to produce calories and nutrition, especially in a crisis and/or grid-down situation. The assumption is that you have no experience and you need to start producing food immediately. The most popular part of the webinar is the Q&A session at the end. So please come prepared with your questions.
Cycle, Rumble civilization cycle. We're trying to get out to different mediums and Revolution Radio. Thank you for letting us use the seed point here so we can broadcast this message. The world's changing so much so quickly. So if you appreciate free speech, consider Revolution Radio, giving them a donation here right at the top navigation bar. You can even use crypto if you want to. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start the show here with a little crypto talk. I know not a lot of people are liking it, but if you haven't seen that it's part of our landscape now, you're not keeping your eyes open. I know a lot of people go to the mark of the beast, mark of the beast. I get it. But credit cards were the mark of the beast. I remember hearing that earlier. If you use credit cards, it's the mark of the beast. Back in the 1970s and 80s when those things were coming around and getting more popular. Online banking. Oh, you can't ever use your crypto if the electricity goes out. Well, you can't use your ATMs or any credit card machines in stores when the electricity's out either. So that's kind of a moot point talking about that. So Revolution Radio, thank you. And then again, keep this station on air, running costs, production costs that they incur while trying to bring in these messages from all the different shows that are running. Take a look at the schedule. You got Studio A, Studio B through the whole entire week. There's hundreds of shows to listen to. And in there, you'll find a nugget that suits what your tastes are for listening. And for those of you listening to our show, thank you for staying with us. And buy me a coffee. Been reading out a couple of super chats from there. Buy me a coffee /civilization cycle. Now, before going on to the break, talking about electricity and energy. And the reason I wanted to talk about Bitcoin for a second is everybody's so focused on the Bitcoin and the blockchain. But Hashgraph is here, and it's here to stay. And that's what the blockchain is eventually going to transition to. Because one of the really talking points is all of this new cryptocurrency, mining and proof of work, proof of stake, all these things, whatever it is, it requires electricity to move it. And Tether is now coming out with a new AI version of Tether through their treasury to allow you to use an AI interface to sell your Bitcoin. Yeah, this SDK thing is kind of interesting. Starting off, because the first thing about Tether is that's where the new minted liquidity for US dollars comes in, and that's why the Bitcoin price goes up and down. The liquidity coming in from Tether, but that's tied to our central bank also. So those two are already in bed together quite cleanly, bedfellows, shall we say, but they're trying to be split and ripped up just a little bit right now. But think about Hashgraph or HBAR, it's 1,000 times less electricity usage and 10,000 times cheaper to send transactions across the net. So once you start to get into this scale of efficiency, I could see a lot of things falling behind. That's why so many new platforms and protocols coming out that are using Ethereum are trying to come up with different ways to save. And Ethereum, I think their new fork is coming up here in March. I do believe that it's going to scale and also, again, drive down the cost of gas or the transaction fee. But the ultimate here is to bring us over to Hashgraph. So we see the world getting moved around in so many ways, shapes, forms, and fashions. So blockchain's hot now. It's going to be hot for the next 5-10 years. But mark my words, at the very end, I've seen many a white paper on this one. They want to scale and move it over to Hashgraph because this is where things can happen instantly and in real time, and it's a distributed ledger just like XRP is, but for the masses and for everything. And digitized assets and real world assets are also going to run right on this. So the way that information is shared out and the gossip, they call it gossip, how these transactions are floated between individuals at the same time that go out and just spread out like 2 times 4 times 4 times 4. And you tell a friend and they tell them it's that fast and it goes out to millions just like that. Whoosh. Where consolidated in and then, a block of hashes runs through and it needs 24, transaction validation transactions under a central funnel. And then finally it's like, okay, that's validated. Well, this new style of jumping it between people to validate it out 1,000 times faster. So the electricity usage is not going to be there. We're moving to this system. And now you got Treasury saying that, or Tether Treasury saying that this is the scary part here. They're trying to integrate AI into your usage of cryptocurrency. Now, for me, the reason I'm trying to dive into this with you for a second is this scares me. It scares me. You know why? because they want to put AI in charge of your cryptocurrency on your private wallet and allow it to interface with you so you can not make mistakes, and the AI can do all the transactions for you. So as they showed here, they're trying to get a voice assistant here, and the SDK, that's a software development kit. So what they were doing was having this demo AI Bitcoin wallet assistant, quote unquote, as their payment agent. So what you would do is connect this API, this is AI API connected to your Bitcoin wallet address. And then you talk to this thing like an AI chatbot, and it will say, yes, did you validate that it's going to this transaction hash, or you're going to this address, and we'll track the hash for you as it moves through the different, validations as it comes through. So the confirmations will walk you through every confirmation. And then you're supposed to leave AI in charge of all of your cold wallet, your private keys, and it's supposed to transact for you. Don't do that. Anytime you give people access to your private keys and your passwords into your cold wallet, it's gone. And then there's no repercussions with this. What happens if it makes a mistake? What happens if you're just talking? Like sometimes I've heard people with Alexa in their house, they're just having a conversation and something will turn on and they're like, well, I didn't mean to do that. I was just having a conversation with a friend. The same thing. Well, hey, Mary was doing some Bitcoin too, and she had this wallet. Should I send a Bitcoin to Mary? Yes. Okay, confirm. And something like this, and just by accident it gets sent. So this whole thing, they're already toying with us on this one. They're trying to get you to integrate your cryptocurrency wallets in with an AI chat agent or an AI avatar agent. And this is where you don't want to be going with AI Bitcoin wallet assistance or any kind of wallet assistant. You don't need a Tron wallet assistant either, or an Ethereum wallet assistant either. Why would you integrate AI, something that's so much more powerful, so much faster, so much more intelligent on mathematics and numerals, and be able to go something 1 million times faster than you to input data, and you're going to leave that in control of your cryptocurrency wallet and your private keys? That's insane. That's truly insane. Why would you do that? The only way they would do that is if they're going to try to steal and milk everybody's wealth. Because once those transactions are gone, you can't reverse those back. You can't. That's the whole point of it. Like, you lose your keys, you lose your access, you send it off to the wrong person. Maybe they're kind enough to send it back to you if you reach out to them and say, hey, can you send that wrong transaction? I didn't mean to send you that 50 Bitcoin. Sorry, that was meant to go to this other address. Can you please send me my 50 Bitcoin back? Most people, would never respond to you, and they would just spend it. And you're like, thanks for the 5 mil. Oh, 5 mil now, but what, it's 13 million per Bitcoin. Oh, thanks for the 100 and some mil. Like, these things are getting dangerously. But what if that's going to be the requirement for us to be able to transact and use cryptocurrency? Like the new legislation that's coming out with the new administration with Trump and thing, super pro crypto. I get it. That's awesome. Double thumbs up. Thank you, President Trump, for bringing crypto into the real world so we can use it. But at the point where you're going to be forced into an AI to integrate that so you can use that or have access to it, that's when we get into a dangerous liaison area here. Now imagine the future 5 years from now, like, yeah, you can use Tether. Yeah, you can hold Bitcoin. Hell yeah, you can hold Ether. But you have to use the AI integration API, Tether AI platform, or what other AI platform that they're going to. This will be the first one, but there'll be many more after this. But you're going to have to use this Bitcoin wallet assistant of the artificial intelligence to interact with that. You yourself as an individual cannot interact anywhere in the crypto sphere or the hashgraph sphere without integrating with AI first. I can see the laws being passed, and then we're moving down that road already. So look forward in the future and just say no. Anyway, welcome back for the second hour of Civilization Cycle Podcast and Revolution Radio. Again, thank you for letting us broadcast on here. If you like this kind of content, keep us on air and keep Revolution Radio on air. Ransom, back to you, man. Thank you for throwing the graphics up there while I was talking.
Sweet. Yeah, I was thinking for those that are trying to navigate the markets and stuff, it's going to be kind of hard, actually, when you're in competition with artificial intelligence to decide everything. So it's like you don't want to give it to control, but at the same time, you have to compete with it. And, you know, people don't understand that so many things are being replaced. So a lot of jobs are being replaced. I saw an article the other day where I guess a company came in for another company and interviewed all of their employees. Then they took that interview about how they do their job and they uploaded it into this chat GPT style AI that was actually going to be the replacement for them. So in a way, remember how Disney used to hire people from other parts of the world and then have the Americans train them to replace themselves? Well, this is the same thing. And here, let me put this article up here. This is equivalent, and look, it costs $50 for a company to train an AI. Now, I don't know how much money they put into, like when you get a job at some place and then you have to go to orientation and training. They had to dish out money to set that up, and I bet it's more than $50 per person. So obviously this is going to become a problem. And I think that what they're going to be doing is so sinister with AI because look, here, let me put this back up here. U.S. cattle herds continue to drop, new record low. Now, we all know
it was record low last year and the year before, too. Like, how many more record lows can we go? Before, it was down to 1916 lows the last time. Oh, no, sorry. That was the sorghum crop. Excuse me.
Well, it seems to be all of it.
1957 lows was the last time we had the low record. So now it's another record low below that. Come on.
Well, just think about it. If it keeps being record lows, then in your mind, it's not hard to draw a graph of the food supply nosediving. And we can't forget that lots of cattle burned up, were destroyed for fears of different ailments, and then there was
the best friend forever is
fires
around again.
Yeah. And then you see the same thing in the egg market. Everybody's scared of the bird flu, which is funny because this has been going around since like 2005 when the H1 whatever came out. And I remember, this is funny because you can say it now because that's old. I remember when one of the first scientists said, oh yeah, we know which virus that is because that's from so-and-so lab. We created that variant right there. So we know which one it is. And this was back way before the recent debacle of things. But it's funny because they're pushing this in our face like never before. But at the same time, guess what? You don't have to worry about it because you can enjoy completely lab-grown chicken and beef and pork. It's just as good. It's cultured meat. Don't worry about how they designed it or which chicken the original cell came from. Did they alter the cell? Did they make it is that one of those extra beef chickens? I mean, extra meat chickens. I'm sorry. That's the next step, right? A beef chicken where it's mixed together. So you get that, certain flavor. Or what if they just grow a filet mignon and it just has the pork grown right into the edge of it, so you could just flop it right out, put it in a frying pan. You get that nice pork beef flavored steak that never existed. No,
you get a bacon. Is that a beef and a chicken, a bacon, and hey, those cultured meat, them some mannered meats right there now.
But this is what we were talking about a couple of years ago, that all these companies would show up to be the savior, right when the markets for the food are having troubles from grain to meat. And remember, you're supposed to feel guilty about eating meat, but don't worry. Don't think about how much carbon that they had to use to grow this meat. It's kind of like we're about to have this coast-to-coast emergency about where to put the windmills, the wind generators, because, they only have a couple year shelf life. So they have to tear them down and they got to store them somewhere. And now all these countries around the world that made deals with these energy companies trying to be green and have some innovative thoughts for their country to be new and modern. Now they're trying to figure out where they're going to put these monstrosities. And, you can't bury them because then you would toxify the aquifer. You can't burn them because, that's bad for the environment. So they're just going to have big stockyards, kind of like those boneyards for airplanes, but for these giant fans all over the place. And I was looking for that. This all ties into the
Oh wait, Ransom, could I throw something?
Market.
Let me throw something in there. What if they were to chip those fans up into ultrafine powder and then mix it with some sort of fertilizer or some sort of topsoil thing, and then went to give it out that way, free for farmers, like they've done with forever chemicals and toxic sludge from water waste management plants that they gave out for free for the fertilizer for a lot of farmers, and it toxified their fields. It wouldn't get past me for them to, pulverize those carbon fiber blades into really fine powder and mix it into something else and sell it as carbon, whatever, topsoil in the bag at Home Depot.
Actually, I was thinking, they could go to those areas that have an increasing number of homeless supply and just chop them up and have them live in there until they, come up with some kind of condition like mesothelioma later, where all the poor people can sue the company long after, they've already made you absorb the chemicals.
You think we could build tiny homes out of old recycled wind turbine blades?
Yeah, they have the plans out there for that. And, I was just really thinking, for our audience, you need to just ignore all of this stuff. It's a joke around here. Like, the people are going around with little bags of eggs to sell them. It's like it's the new black market. People are joking about that. They're even making viral videos, teasing the police, passing money and taking little bags and hiding it, go get in their car. And then the cop comes out thinking that they have probable cause, and it's just eggs, which can carry.
Or get some dude on the subway, opens up the jacket like they used to have the watches and necklaces and stuff in the subway.
I got brown eggs.
I got brown eggs. I got
double yolks.
Duck eggs. Close that back up.
I got the double yolks right here. You can't find them anywhere else. No, but with all seriousness, this is the time that at least Americans, and I would advise other countries too, to start freezing, jarring, and all of that stuff. Because actually, you could vote with your dollar right now. While there still is food, you could get it or you could grow it, and just start making jars. That's literally my mission this year, is to turn every single thing I grow outside into backup supplies just sitting in the closet. That's okay if, young people think we're weird with all the pig's feet and pickled eggs and, squash for 3 years. Just store it up there. But, it's those things that you get tired of eating in the autumn because you've been eating all of that stuff all year. Then you put it back in there, and then in the winter, you can start making a lot of hot stuff. Unfortunately for us, it's like 80 degrees right now. And speaking of that, they are telling us here in New Mexico that this is the record, that we've never been hotter. But I remember being this hot, specifically in February, multiple times growing up here, thinking, oh, wow, you could get out. And it happens quite often, where everything starts to bloom early, and the grass grows back and everything, and then it freezes really hardcore in March. And then we get all kinds of winter storms, record-breaking winter. You notice that each year that they say there's record-breaking heat, they have to follow a week later with record-breaking low temperatures. So the other night I was watching the news.
Not as much media coverage though on that.
Right. But the other day I was watching the news for Albuquerque, and it was 33 degrees outside, and the guy with the straight face said, this is the warmest temperature record-breaking high that we've had. Like if it was really hot outside at 33 degrees. And I'm like, wow. So now we're having a little springtime weather, but it's still dropping down to 40 at night. So it's not like abnormal weather, especially for this area, depending on which Niña or Niño cycle we're in. And they ignore that, and they never tell their watchers that, everything's dependent on a cycle. So it's not really abnormal. It's just going back to a previously, period of time where it was normal for a time. And people have a hard time wrapping their head around the idea that climate is never stable for very long in any place on the globe. Like there's been a few places, but even then there's periods where they get, trashed out. Like you can talk about that Middle East, North Africa area several times in the past when men were alive, walking the area. It was a jungle there. There was everything that you think of from the African plains and more. And that's why you see all these old depictions of, Sumerians and their lions and all of these different animals, because it was a totally different world then. It was green. It had a lot of animals. There were different empires, and they were all focused on that area. And now we're going back to that. So mark my words, the U.S. is going to set up interests there to try to play the referee of the world in the new Roman Empire. And this is a long-standing, really, idea. You could go to all the people that supposedly we're not in favor of now, the WEF, the Trilateral Commission. What was the one after that? The Bilderbergs. You got the Bilderbergs plans for stuff. And then we started getting into the Davos and all the secret plans. And right about then, it seems they didn't care, because they knew that it was too far progressed to turn backwards. So they know exactly what they're doing. We're about to revert to, I would say, 500 BC, at least, if not further back in time. And the world is going to kind of be set up in that way. So what wasn't important, which is basically the equatorial bands, is going to be the center of attention probably for the next 1,000 years, I imagine.
Yeah, I would agree with you too. And I was looking for the water vapor concentrations from the Hunga Tonga eruption. I had that slide earlier, can't find it. But what it does show is that the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is coming out. This is why we're seeing a lot of record rains. But in some of these places, right around the equator, 20 north, 20 south, somewhere in these bands, it's getting extremely dry, like it's absolutely flipping into incredible drought after this. So we had the full, Hunga Tonga adds 14% more moisture vapor into the atmosphere. So we had the heating, and then we had El Nino at a record spike, almost the highest or most intense El Nino ever recorded. And we were at solar maximum at the same time. And then we come with the Hunga Tonga eruption, all those things overlapping on themselves. And we got an extreme heat spike. Okay, well, now we're coming into La Nina, and every model is confirming that we're heading into La Nina. So the weather patterns change, the moisture patterns change, the rainfall changes. What's so interesting, though, with the water vapor rain out, it seems that, just from my simple assessment, is the extra moisture that was pushed up there, when it's getting pulled out, is also grabbing what would be our normal moisture and pulling out. So we're getting more of a rain out of the atmosphere, leaving more of a drying pattern up there, because each time it rains, there's more of what would be considered your normal flow of water vapor and moisture in the atmosphere, capturing into larger droplets, being captured on the way down. So we're getting this full-on drought area across, like I say, from equator, 20 north, 20 south, completely around the planet, and maybe even into 30 north in some places. This is why we're seeing such tremendous flips in the weather. There it is. That's not the newest one. Okay, so you see how it's really dark green. If you go to the watchers.net, I believe it is, watchers.net, they got the newest one up there, Cap Alon. Thank you for throwing up the stuff. So yeah, go to the watchers.net. This is a great one for anybody out there who wants, or watchers.news, watchers.news. Yeah, and check that one out there. Watchers.news, Cap Alon, running this one. It's over on the right side on the bar chart. Over on the right side, you're going to see the newest water vapor concentration map. So it's right on the front page there, Ransom. Just scroll down a little bit and you will see it on the right sidebar. If you see that at all, it'll show you that the water vapor concentrations. I had that. I can't believe I can't find it. It should be something super easy to find here. I save all these kind of charts. I'm kind of nerdy like this. I like to save charts to get the progression, and then also look back into, seeing who is changing numbers across the planets, and which numbers are matching up and which ones have been changed. Because here I got it for you, Ransom. I got you right. Here's the newest one. So boom, let me send this to you over on Skype. You can take a look, throw it up. And I also got the cuneiform grain tablet entry there for you too. I got both of those. So the best way to look at it is, since the extra water vapor went up, it's pulling down extra moisture as it's coming out. Now we're getting to some sort of equilibrium where the Hungatonga water is kind of, a lot of it's out of the atmosphere, because if you're looking at the latest readings, you're not going to see that dark green like we did in the previous slide, Ransom, that you showed there. But what we do see is it's starting to dry out across the entire atmosphere from the equator all the way to the polar regions, both north and south. But in that previous slide you showed, there was a lot of green density throughout the entire end of 2023. That's kind of where that chart you showed there was right to the end of 2023, and that showed a significant amount of water and water vapor still in the atmosphere. But now it's starting to come out as it gets to that very lighter green shade. That's less and less water vapor in the atmosphere. But what seems like it's going to overcompensate, and we're going to get into an extreme drying period here really shortly, like right now. And then eventually, after all that excess water is pulled out and it pulls out excess with it, we're going to come back some sort of equilibrium, as long as we don't get another giant volcanic eruption. And they've been talking about the one off of Oregon for quite some time. It's a mile wide, and they say it's going to erupt. And then, yeah, got Santorini Island. Don't know what's going to happen. That Santorini, that is a super volcano that went off in the Mediterranean. For those of you who don't know, those periphery islands that you see all over, that's the caldera rim that's still left after the massive eruption. That blew out, that entire caldera of all those vacation islands, that was all one volcano. Yeah, there you go. That's the caldera. That's how much blew out of there. So the seawater that you see in there is, well, the empty area that was ejected. Now this particular eruption, when it did happen, but we're multi-tens of thousands of years in the past, this thing blanketed the planet with ash and really cooled a lot of temperatures. There's a huge amount of research done on Santorini eruption. You know, you can take a look at it yourself. But the subsequent eruption phase is on its cycle also. They had some smaller eruptions through time. There was one, I think, about 3,000 years ago, smaller one, much smaller one than the initial one that cleared out that full caldera. But you think about if we had another, I wouldn't say big water vapor eruption as much as Tonga, but if we had even a slight eruption out of that area, regionally, that would ruin the economy of Europe right there. So then again, where do we come back to? Okay, we got quake swarms happening, Santorini, so many that they got to evacuate the island. All the news headlines keep blazing over to this massive mile-wide volcano off of Oregon about to go kaboom into whatever atmosphere. We got a huge amount of volcanoes rumbling across Japan, and they're all erupting in unison. There's a huge amount of more than the normal of the volcanic ridge, whatever's happening, and the earthquake swarms down here in Taiwan. All along this rift, there's something significant happening. So there's more pressure pushing up here, causing quakes, and then the same thing's happening in the Mediterranean. Like why 7,000, I think, 4.0 earthquakes in the last 3 weeks. What's causing that, do you think? Are they ready for another eruption on the Santorini? I mean, that would be devastating for anywhere around in the Mediterranean region. And it depends on, predominantly that ash would drift right over like Jordan and Israel and Syria and this sort of area, northern Egypt. That whole area would get caked with ash and water vapor coming down and mud and this sort of thing. So if we were to get a major eruption out of Santorini again, or is it just going to be a large earthquake? A large earthquake, because those earthquakes in the Mediterranean usually slough off a bunch of stuff off the sides of those underwater volcanoes there, when they cause massive tsunamis to swing and rip through the Mediterranean region locally. I mean, there's time immemorial of just large tsunamis through the Mediterranean. I mean, those are just so frequent and plentiful. They talk about the one off of the East Coast, what's that, Canary Islands, that just, if one part of that shelf volcano was to slough off, it would send a 1,000-foot wave over to America. I mean, what would it do in the Mediterranean if you had a part of a major volcano come off in a 8 or 9.0 earthquake off of Santorini? That would just be like a bathtub sloshing back and forth of multi-100-foot waves coming in on all the coasts and all the ports. Oh, it would be devastating. That would say, if that were to happen, our world would shift in an instant. I would not financial advice, but if you hear of a major quake and there's tsunami warnings issued across all of the Mediterranean, I would sell everything instantly, because that is going to collapse markets. If you can get out in cash, whatever happened, the panic off of that one is going to collapse Europe's economy and reverberate back. You'll get a head start. All you need to do is watch the volcano, because that'll be a major indicator of the collapsing. That'll be just like a knockout of the economy if that happens. Especially if it's a tsunami that's generated from that of anything over like 10 feet. If there's a 20-foot, 50-foot, 100-foot tsunami generated from that mega quake off of Santorini, man, ports are going to be just devastated across the Mediterranean. So not financial advice, but if I saw that, I would be on a sell order, sell everything and get into cash. Not financial advice, just.
It seems like that would be perfect, right? It would be perfect for the people that are setting up for a new Mediterranean empire, because then they would. Oh man, if they had a giant navy, they could come in and rescue everyone and then help them rebuild. It's almost like, I was saying before, you have to have that destruction, you have to have that demolition first. But yeah, that would totally do it. Can you imagine how much water might come off of that Santorini thing? It would be a Hunga-Tunga-like explosion, possibly, depending on where it came out. But think about what that would do to Europe and North Africa. In North Africa, it would rain a lot. It would rain a lot more than normal. And in Europe, they would probably freeze, or at least around the Black Sea area, because I believe the jet stream goes that way, right? It would carry it right over there into the Baltics and the Black Sea area. And it would just go north of the Levant, which means that if you were living down in the Levant, you could easily help everyone else out in the Mediterranean. If that thing went off Oregon, all bets are off there. I don't know what would happen with
they're
that.
saying there's so much water pressure down at a couple miles beneath the surface that the water pressure from the volcanic explosion can't overpower the mile above it of water. Yeah, I don't know if I can believe that, man. I've seen some of theirs.
Right, but we know that giant tsunamis have washed away everything on the West Coast before. But now there's cities there. There's not just bogs and trees and all of that stuff. There's actual population there. So I don't know what would happen to them, or even the people of Japan, Hawaii, and over there if something like that happened, because it depends on which way it moves. And like you were talking about, if you had an avalanche style event from an earthquake, either at Santorini or anywhere else in the world, really, that's next to civilization, they're gonna be neck deep in some salty water, if not more.
Well, think about the land deformation as well, because if you go off of Egypt, there's several cities that are out there, not very far off the coast, in like 20 feet of water. Some places are 40 feet of water. They find entire bands off of Israel, too. There's a huge amount of cities at around the 40-foot depth level, all through the Baltic Sea, 20 to 40-foot depth level. Well, that could be actual sea level rise, or it could have been from deformation from some sort of event as well. So they're kind of unsure. They're trying to explain it away as, oh, well, it's just normal. All those hundreds and hundreds of cities at the 30-foot, 40-foot, 20-foot level, all the way through anywhere there's water from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea there. Huge amount of archaeological discoveries and underwater archaeological ruins. They're trying to explain it away as that, okay, well, that was built during the last Holocene era. And I'm like, wait a minute. It was warmer back at 6,000 years ago than it is today. So we've had some subsequent glacial growth, and Greenland's been more covered with ice. Antarctica's more covered with ice than anything 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years ago was the absolute highest point of our temperatures we measured in the last 12,000. If you come off, let's say the Younger Dryas event, you got the 8,000 year spike, and then right around that mid-Holocene, it gets really warm again. So we got these two mid-Holocene heat spikes. That point, glaciers were there was more water in the ocean at that time than there is. There's been a lot of glacial growth in the last 6,000 years, believe it or not, the opposite of what they've been telling you. So how did these cities get 20 to 30, 40 feet underwater when the water levels were equally as high, if not a foot higher than they are today? at 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years prior. It just doesn't make sense unless it was the previous before 12,500 years ago, stretching back some 13, 14, 17,000 years when they were just coming out of the actual glacial period. So 18,000 years ago, Earth's still pretty icy, far lower sea levels. So that just upsets history in itself right there, because along the Mediterranean, how many mud floods, how many ash-covered areas, I mean, complete cities buried in ash, 10, 20 feet deep. And then we got the mega floods. I mean, the Mediterranean is just nothing more than a chapter after chapter of mega disaster burying entire civilizations. Talk about that. That's way different than bombing something into dust. To have nature do it, I mean, it's just such a repetitive cycle along in the Mediterranean and north coast of Africa. I mean, the history of that place is far more tumultuous than a lot of other places in terms of just sheer devastation that wipes out everything in its path. So here we are, disputed historical timelines, glacial records not really matching, sea level records not really matching. How could they build something underwater? You get to all these anomalies, and that's where people don't want to talk about the climate record either, because it just doesn't match with what we're told on, oh, the world's getting hotter. We'll go back 8,000 years and look how warm it was. Can I send you the GISP2 ice core data set? I was just sending this to some moron over on X who was saying, oh, the world's the hottest it's ever been. I'm like, do you do any of your own temperature reconstruction data? Like, do you ever actually go outside the mainstream narratives and look for anything? Like, what is, and I sent him the chart on his thing, because people that keep regurgitating this nonsense all the time. Oh, it's the warmest ever in the world. No, it's not. It's really not. It's not even remotely close to being the warmest ever. Like, really, we are so far down. We are heading into the next glacial period. We are done with the warming in this this sweet spot between the 90,000 years of ice. We are done with it. Each subsequent step down is going to be cooler. And Ransom, I just sent you that Greenland GISP2 ice core. It used to be the gold standard for data until it disproved global warming. And they're like, well, we can't use that anymore. You start to look at those 3 gigantic heat spikes. So those heat spikes means glacial activity is lessened. Like, there was more melt off during the Minoan warming than there was ever now. Are you kidding me? You take a look at some of this reconstruction data and you're like, wait, something doesn't add up here. That's what I'm saying. Go back to that 7,000 year prior period. You got the spikes, 8,000 years prior spike, Minoan warming period spike. So that Roman warming period, that's when Greenland was actually green, where the Vikings were able to get in there and have animal husbandry, which are now ice fields right now. Before, there were actually green pastures on Greenland. That's why they called it Greenland. That was subsequently warmer of the Roman warming period. Okay, so that doesn't make sense, because the Minoan warming period was at least 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than that, which means glaciers would be melting even more at that time. So our sea levels would be even higher than they are today. See that downward trend? That shows that there's more glacial growth from, let's say, 3,500 years prior, 8,000 years prior, 7,000 years prior. Moving forward, the more glaciers are growing now than there have been at 3 different points in history in the past. And they're trying to tell us that we're coming into some sort of heating event. That's ridiculous. That's why I get, that this information is not so well received on YouTube. But anyway, we'll roll with it today, because having all these buried cities 20, 30, 40 feet underwater show that they were not built during this this interglacial period. They were built prior to that. And prior to that takes it out 13 to 17,000 years ago, which doesn't mix with what is taught to us in the history books. So now we're missing how many thousands of years. If those cities were built 13,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago, and then our history starts with these same cities at 6,000, where's that 10,000 or 9,000 years of history that disappeared? That's what doesn't make sense. Like, you look at these disasters all across the Mediterranean and all these cities that are underwater. The times don't match with when the construction dates could be, at least not in what we consider this interglacial period. It was prior to that. And nobody wants to talk about it. Anyway, I'm done with my rant, man. Go.
I thought I would shift us a little bit to, which is funny. I wish they would make a program like this, and I'm sure there is. Basically, to what you were talking about, you would take 400 feet of ocean off of the ocean and put it back in the glaciers and the caps, and then look at the world map, and you'd see where all of the missing information is. I mean, because just like today, back then, most of civilization was concentrated on the edge of the water. The edge of the water is way off the coast now because the coast is 400 feet higher than it used to be. I mean, everything from the origin of some hominids probably could be there. You know, stories like Atlantis, all of that stuff could be within it. But, you know, I wanted to show you this new cool thing for people that...
Yeah, the new U.S. Navy mapped the entire ocean bottom. So that's all top secret information. So I know they found all those cities down there because they mapped the entire ocean bottom, as far as I know. And that was done decades ago, like in the late 2000s or mid 2000s. The entire ocean bottom had been mapped. So imagine all the cities they found under there.
Right. And plus, you know, they drudge between France and England all the time, and they're pulling up mammoth bones and old branches, boat parts. There's cities down in there where people lived all the way into the Neolithic era, for sure. They were down there. There's probably stone monuments, all of that stuff flooded. But this is kind of beside the point. I found this new software, and what it does is it shows you where the shade's going to be. Now, this might not seem that extravagant, but if you can imagine
what's
what
going
you
to
can
be,
do.
sorry.
Okay, so if what you're looking at is those lighted areas are where the sun first hits in an area. So if you're looking at it right now, you see this little tiny dot. That is at the peak of the Three Rivers Petroglyph Monument, and I have the date set to December 21st of the year. So this would be, if you were sitting right there, you would get the first daylight sun rays, and any glyphs or stone monument would point to a direct thing at the beginning of this day, and the same for the equinox, and then the summer solstice and the fall equinox. So you would know where all the sacred stuff was without having to do much archaeological know-how.
Ooh.
So
can you send me that link, please?
Yeah,
after the show?
This is one way that you could use this. Another way is, here, imagine this, is if you wanted to plant your crops as they did, say, maybe the Maya or actually the people that lived in the Andes would be a better example of this, because you could go like to Machu Picchu or something and it would work the same way, and you could dial out the clock and see where the sun hits the first places, which areas are going to be shaded the longest. So you can see this big peak there. That's the shadow of this little Three Rivers mountaintop area where the trail is. So I was just using that for an example, but you could see like you could reverse it in time, and then you can go all the way to the evening hours where you would know where to have your plants that maybe were getting too hot during the day. They would get the first shade. It would keep the water longer. So you could plan out literally by the time of the year. Like, so let me change it to, say June 21st. Oops, I messed it up. But anyway, you get
longest
the
day of the year. No, June 21st. That's the longest day of the year.
Right. So you would be able to plan out everything from there according to where the sun's going to be. Oops, let me put it back here. I got it on the wrong day, but you'll see what I mean. So in the morning, this would be the hottest part of the year, and do you see all that shaded area? That's where you would want to have your crops for morning time hours, right there, where it has the most shade throughout the day. See, and then it'll hit like about 8 o'clock. You get full
sun. And then
sun.
that's noon, and then as you move forward, it should come from the other direction, the shadowing, right? Yeah, there you go.
So you could plan everything based on what you have, the hills, to know where the sun will last. Like, say you live in a more northern latitude, you'd want to know right where the sun's going to hit for the longest during the day to get your crops the most sunlight, the most energy to grow late in the year. So like if we skipped over to let's say September, October, something like that. Let's say September. And then you would be able to do the same thing. See, in the daytime, you'd know that where
Oh, it's similar.
exactly.
Yeah, that moved a little bit, didn't it, from going at the 4 o'clock position to more 3 o'clock position.
Yeah, so you could plant your crops all year, rotate them, all based on where the sun is. Or, like I said, you could go to these ancient sites on the solstice, the equinoxes, and look right here and map out the area, know exactly where you want to go at what time, and you would see right where the shadows of mountains, where the little peaks of sunlight will shine through. So, say if you found a little rock monument that was in the mountains, and you know that it has some kind of, celestial alignments, all of that stuff, but the solar clock, this would literally show you exactly where to build a monument if you wanted to do that in today's age. But I thought it was really weird because you could just go there and, like I said, you could just find out right where the shadow or the last little bit of sunlight's going to shine on a certain day, which would tell you where almost obviously all of the ancients were gonna be doing stuff. I mean, it's just like it's a really cool map. You could back it up, you could put it anywhere, and it just shows you exactly where the sun is going to be first, where it's going to line up. So this is in the middle of the year. It looks pretty straight, but if we switch over to June or whatever, it's totally different.
So I sent you a sea level ice map going back 135,000 years, interactive one. I just sent that link to you so you can take a look from present and then move it on back in time and then go to 10,000 years prior. Then you can see where the sea levels would be, and you can spin it around. It looks like Google Earth almost, but for sea levels. And if you zoom right down in on the areas in the Black Sea, you're going to need to go further back, at least 16,000 years ago, to find some of these same areas off of Israel, off of Cyprus, off of Greece. And look how far Cairo sticks out into the water. And they find those different cities directly off Cairo, off the Nile, going way further out, 15 miles offshore. But you got to go back 16,000 years to find that. But they're telling us it was built some, dynastic period, something 4,500 years prior or something. That does not make sense. If you follow these ice age maps, you can start to see where a lot of these land masses were, but we're going back further in time. So again, they never like to talk about the previous civilizations that were before the Younger Dryas period, but that is the only time that these civilizations, even at 30 feet deep in the water, or 20 feet deep, or 40 feet deep, could be built. The land masses literally didn't exist after the Younger Dryas era. They just didn't. So, this confusion in history here is a good one to talk about, because I would put it somewhere around 16,000 years prior, at least looking at the interactive maps, because I'm looking off Cairo to find, and then if you go off of Libya also, Tunisia, look at all the extra land that's off of Tunisia, north there, that comes in after you move back and forth. Like, that is incredible how far off of Corsica and this sort of thing that it extends down. I mean, huge amounts of landmass that came and go. My whole thing is the Chaldean Empire, or the Chaldeans in the Black Sea. They're finding, 30 foot underwater, but they're dating it at 6,000 years prior. And I'm like, whoa. You couldn't have actually had that. That's impossible. So dating something at 6,000 years prior in the Black Sea that's now 30 feet underwater, that's not possible unless it was at least 15,000 years ago. So you look at this, and there's a lot of mix up in history. So if you are going to look for ancient sites, they would definitely be much older than they are if they're discovering them underwater. In some of these depths, you can just go scuba diving, just grab a tank and head out. And there's a lot of different places like this just off the Mediterranean coast that huge amounts of artifacts are still being found. And there you go. That whole area, there's a name of that place out there, something land.
This is exactly where the traditions of the Slavic people, they talked about this massive landmass that was at the north of Europe that they lived on, that flooded which made them move into all the neighboring territories, which gave them the name Slavic in the first place, because that means slave. They kept being a slave in the new lands they were in, and this shows that exactly right here. 20,000 years ago, that
yeah, 24,000. Yeah, because they couldn't exist when there's ice there. So you bring that map a little further, like they couldn't live where the glaciers were, right? So there was that melt period, and then a subsequent, the land recovered over 1,000 years or so that allowed them to then move and have incredible bounty, incredible bounty and animals and this forests and these sort of raw materials to use to build a society. Under ice, that's impossible too. So you start to get this overlap of you can't do it during ice. You got to wait a few hundred years before things rebound at least. And then we get the sweet spot where civilization moves there, and then they got flooded out. So
well, look at
you can see the history, how it's not linear like we're taught at all in any way, shape, or form.
And then look at their map. Here's 29, closest you can get to 12,900, right? 13K. And then you move there, everything, all the ice is gone. But when you look over here, right there at that 13K boundary, you have the most land in North Africa, the Levant, and in Europe right there. And then it just disappears. The Great Flood right there.
The Great Flood, yeah. And especially through the Baltic region too. And that it was something beyond, we don't even have a comparison to put it to. There's really, it's so far beyond anything that we can compare to. I mean, I'm sure the last interglacials experienced something as well, coming out of that glacial period into the last one, say 118,000 years ago, something. But otherwise, we really don't have anything to compare when you got thousands of quadrillions of gallons of water rolling off, just sculpting and scouring the planet and filling up the oceans in like a foot every 6 months, or like 3 feet in less than a year, like continuously for decades on end, and I had another half foot, like just so far beyond our orders of magnitude that you really can't even frame it with anything we know.
You know, and on top of that, people forget some land has gone up and down even since then. There's a city, I forgot the name of it, that was an old Roman city in the Mediterranean, that it was above water twice and built, and they hung out there. And they used to use the area for saunas and hot baths and stuff because it had a lot of geologic activity that would heat the water. But the entire city at one time fell below the ocean, and then thousands of years later came back up and was reoccupied by the Roman Empire for the same reason. So imagine what they used to think when an entire area would just go below the ocean. And I don't know how much, they knew about volcanic activity, but imagine an area so big that's rising above the ocean for a while, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then going back under the ocean, and it becomes mythological, and then it pops back up above the ocean again, and also displacing the water. So that water has to go somewhere when the land goes up. Necessarily, the water would have to move out of its way, and you could just imagine over the tens of thousands of years, how many things have been buried and reburied by glaciers or pushed out of its position when the glacier grew. So everything's out of order or in disorder, even for the ancient people. So it's hard to know even how they thought about piecing together their ancient world compared to what us getting tidbits from our ancient world referring to that time. And we know it's, the story has expanded, but only by the elites. And we kind of know that because if you go back in time, you have to follow the different empires, all of them trying to get that little piece in the Levant to run the Mediterranean. And over again, after those civilizations fell, newer civilizations went back there to dig up stuff, find out old stories, old books, all of that stuff repeatedly. So much so that it was, an agenda for, I would say, the European expanded empires for a really long time, all the way up into recent times in 2003, when we went in there and got a bunch of stuff. And then again in 2011, they dug up a lot of stuff on the Giza Plateau and all around Syria and Iraq. And then, of course, in the meantime, little groups of armed militias, I don't want to name them, went around blowing up the remnants of stuff that we could find out about. Totally covered up.
The city of Ur. Yeah, and thank you for tonight, everybody listening and staying with us through the couple hours here in Revolution Radio. Thank you for letting us broadcast. And also, please support our work on buymeacoffee.com/civilization cycle, and head over to our website, civilizationcycle.com. Or your email in there. We'll get to the show notes of everything we talked about, 10 bullet points, maybe a link, a new story to help you continue to do your